And now we're back at Studio B at KUSF, and in walked Diane di Prima. Hi, Diane. Thank you for coming down.
Hi, Frank. How you doing?
I'm doing great and feeling even greater to have you here on the air here at KUSF.
Thank you.
Thank you much. Diane di Prima, I believe, is one of the greatest poets in the United States, and we're lucky to have her here in San Francisco. We're going to talk a little bit about some of her life from the Recollections of My Life as a Woman, which is basically the New York years of Diane's life. And I'm going to also let you know right now about some of the shows coming up where she will be reading from Recollections of My Life as a Woman. You can catch her at the Bird and Beckett, that's 2788 Diamond Street, on April 28th at 4 p.m., and that's a free reading. Let's see, Bernal Books, which is at 401 Cortlandt Street, and that's May 3rd at 7 p.m. That's also free. And at the Modern Times Bookstore, 888 Valencia Street, great bookstore too, May 9th, 7:30 p.m., and also free. Now, Diane has brought a number of pieces of work down to read from. She'll be reading from the Recollections that we just spoke about, and also Loba, which I think is an absolutely stunning book that's captured my imagination for a number of months now, and also some unpublished pieces too. So we really have a lot of treats coming up. And Diane, I almost really don't know where to start as far as an interview, so let's just talk a little bit about Recollections and how that came about.
Okay, well, I had in mind to write a short book, which I didn't do. I wrote a long book about various ways that I kind of bought into different cultural, I was Italian American, and so on, myths about how a woman was supposed to behave and be. And I had in mind that it was going to be a funny book and written for my daughters. I felt everybody was being so heavy about all this. Why don't we own up to some of our stupidities in a silly way? What I wound up with was a long book that only goes through the years in New York. It ends in 1965 when I was 31, and it's a book about basically everything in my life. I found myself dwelling for a long time on the flavor of my grandparents' home and what it was like just before World War II broke out and what it was like for Italian Americans at that time, and then just sort of savoring each event. I'm writing volume 2 now, which is, I think the working title anyway is The Grail is a Green Stone, and it's about the California years, and starts with being in upstate New York and going to live at Tim Leary's place in Millbrook for 6 months, and then coming out west. And it's more a book of quest, whereas this for Recollections of My Life as a Woman is more a book about the art scene and the writing scene and so on, because I was in the midst of all that. I made a theater and I made a press, and we put out The Floating Bear with Amiri Baraka, and I did all those things, whereas out here was more about political action and about spiritual quest. I was with the Zen Center for a number of years. I taught for Chogyam Trungpa at Naropa Institute when it started, and so those two things are going to be more the focus of the second volume. But what I've got now is the first volume has just come out in paperback in the last week or so. And so I'm doing some readings for it.
Well, it is itself a great read and absolutely entertaining. I love just the way the stories just flow into each other on that.
Thank you.
Speaking about readings and poetry and teaching, you're doing a lot of teaching yourself these days. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I teach privately. Sometimes I teach, I have taught at CCAC and CIIS and other schools around, but mostly I like to teach privately, and I do classes that come up once a month as a group class, and then I meet privately with each student once a month, and they usually go from October to June. I'm reading manuscripts right now for a new group that's going to start in October. And if anybody's interested, they can reach me at 415-841-0717, and just leave a message and I'll get back to them.
Could you repeat that number again, Diane?
Sure, 415-841-0717.
All right, thank you.
And in the summer, I teach weekend workshops up in Petaluma, and they're more just getting into the country and enjoying the hotter weather than we get in the city, and sort of like 2 sessions a day of writing. This year, it's going to be a repeat of my workshop called Poetics of Loss, in which we deal with death and write our own death poems like the Japanese did and so on, and deal with our death and then our losses over the 2 days. We spend one day on ourselves. And because until we admit that we're going to die, we can't really mourn anybody else.
Right.
So that'll be in Petaluma in August, and people can find out about it by calling my number.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about?
Well, some of the poems that are unpublished that I'll be reading from today. There's a book coming out of poems of the 80s and 90s from a press in Chicago called Tia Chucha Press, where Luis Rodriguez runs with other people. It's called the Guild Complex, is the overarching organization. So many kinds of art institutions. And that book is going to be called The Poetry Deal, and I'm going to read the title poem from it. And a new edition of Revolutionary Letters, which first came out in 1970, is coming out in the fall from Last Gasp Press, and I'm going to read a few new political poems that are going into that.
Great.
I think a lot of political stuff is on my mind today.
I can see why. And one last question, just personally for me. Tell us about Loba.
Loba. I wasn't planning on that one. It's just suddenly the introductory poem, which is called Ave, happened in the end of 1971. And then I found one day, a few months later, I was teaching. I was teaching in Salinas with another poet, Elias Ruscay Cortez. And suddenly these lines started running through my head, and I had to let Elias take over the class while I scribbled this stuff down because I thought I was going a little crazy. And it was the beginning of the first poem of the first part of Loba. And Loba's continued. It's kind of like a visitation. It comes in when it wants to, and when it's there's nothing else you can do but it. And so those first lines, if he did not come apart in her hands, he fell like flint on her ribs. Imagine I'm in a classroom of high school kids. This stuff starts talking, and the first few poems all came in that way. And then I began to I wrote it very vigorously for the first 7 or 8 years, 71 to 78. And then the other parts have come in since. So the book that's out now with Penguin of Loba has everything that was done by 78 and then as much again. So it's about a 300-something page poem at this point about the journey, a woman's journey, but really anybody's journey, the spiritual journey.
I certainly felt a kinship with it as I read it and didn't view it exclusively as a woman's work, or maybe it spoke to the woman in me.
Yeah,
but
we all have both, right? But I think it's just, for me, it's just a particular visitation or voice that happens, and those poems I just know are Loba poems.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, speaking of poems then, shall we just get right into some poetry now?
Sure. I thought maybe I'd start by reading a little prose from Recollections of My Life as a Woman, and then from there move on to reading poems. And I'll just
Perfect.
Run with it.
Please do.
Okay.
Run with the wolves.
Thanks a lot for having me. I've been thinking about what's going on in the world a lot, and one of the parts of my book, Recollections of My Life as a Woman, that I wanted to read today, I was about 19 or 20 when this stuff happened, and I was living on my own in New York, having dropped out of school, and I'm just going to go right into it. It's a story of a young man I knew at that time. My first-hand acquaintance with the Cold War madness came early in my second apartment when the FBI came to my door looking for a lover of my roommate O'Reilly's, a young writer whom we knew as Mike Strong. That was his alias, anyway. Mike was from Yugoslavia, had been left in America when his dad, who had been here as some kind of cultural attaché, was recalled to Yugoslavia by Tito. The various factions of Eastern European communism were beyond my comprehension, but I had the basic peasant understanding all governments are up to no good. Anyway, Mike was left in Los Angeles with an aunt and no papers when he was about 14, and he had wandered eastward, ending up in New York City where he met O'Reilly and me. At some point, his existence was discovered by what I was later told was a routine FBI check of the local employment agencies. It made me wonder back then, 1955, about the level of surveillance we were all being subjected to, but that is another story. At any rate, Mike was determined by the FBI to be a fearsome menace to the order and safety of our American way of life. Their valiant search for him led them somehow to my friend Freddie Herco, who was innocently filing away at some temporary office job. And Freddie was startled into giving them my address. I stood my ground, stood literally in the doorway, wouldn't let them inside my pad without a warrant, and refused to tell them anything. But it was traumatic. It was my first close-up glimpse of the big reality that in 1955 had undone so much of Hollywood, of New York, had killed the Rosenbergs and was even then gunning for Wilhelm Reich, whose books Mike Strong had incidentally introduced me to. Anyway, I'm going to skip a little ahead. And the FBI came back a second time a year later to tell me that Mike had now achieved the status of a federal fugitive. And if I gave him shelter or comfort, I would myself be committing a federal offense. At that point, some atavistic conditioning kicked in. Some story my anarchist grandfather had told long ago in the Bronx. And I flipped into a genuine rage. I backed those two guys down the hallway and down the stairs while I yelled at them that the laws of hospitality were older than the laws of the United States of America. And by God, if anyone came to my door seeking shelter or comfort, they would certainly get it. But Mike remained a fugitive, first here and then in Canada, hiding for years in an attic apartment in Toronto without going out, until he finally lost it, became paranoid and crazy. Last I heard of him, I was told he was in a loony bin near Buffalo, another casualty of the American way. And one more brief piece I want to read. I used to work in a bookstore in the Village, was very well known at that time, was called the Phoenix Bookstore on Cornelia Street, tiny little one-block street. And I just wanted to read a little bit about the censorship thing that was going on at that time. In those days, which we forget now, it was illegal to sell Henry Miller, Jean Genet, many, many other folks. So I want to read a little bit about that. At least I wanted to read the part which tells how we got the books into the store and out again. I'll introduce it with this little part. The book trade certainly gave one little respect for the law. At that period, we were in the throes of an insane, obsessive repression of the written word. You could get arrested for selling Henry Miller or Jean Genet. Howl by Allen Ginsberg was on trial, and The Love Book by Lenore Kandel. Both Miller and Genet were being published in France by Olympia Press and were much sought after in the United States. I'm going to skip ahead. The Phoenix had its own underground railroad for these books, its own method of importing desired but forbidden literature. Since most of it was printed in France by Olympia Press, book-like packages coming from France to the United States would have been suspect, likely to be examined by customs. In the system that Larry Walrick, who owned the bookstore, had worked out, the books went from France to Turkey, where a friend of his lived. In Turkey, they were wrapped in small packages, about 3 books to a package, and stamped with the return address of an Episcopalian funeral home in Ankara. They were then duly labeled as somebody's ashes and sent to an address, ostensibly a relative of the deceased, in New York City. Each 2 or 3 book package was sent, of course, to a different address. Larry had plenty of friends in New York to receive them, and the mail was spread out over a period of weeks. It seemed that no one at customs felt a really strong urge to open packages of Episcopalian bones and ashes, and the books got through. So those are just 2 little vignettes from this book, which goes from around 1934, when I was born, into 1965, Recollections of My Life as a Woman. And from here on out, I think I would like to just read poems. Starting with, maybe, this poem, which is a poem written to poetry and called The Poetry Deal. I'm speaking directly to poetry in it. I was trying to figure out what it was. What was the agreement I had made in my mind with the art when I had started? I want to say that I don't want anything but the whisper of your scarf as you do the dance of the 7 veils, the soft sound of your satin slippers on the carpet, and the raw, still bloody meat you toss my way that I chew on all night long. That I don't want anything you don't already bring, trips to other worlds, dimensions of light or sound, the rides on the back of a leopard on those black rocks, high over some sea or gorge. But it isn't true. I want all that, the sheet lightning of quasars you dance between, those colors, yes, but I want you as mother, sister, the stone walls of the cave I lie in trance for 7 days, the mist around the cabin that makes it invisible. I want the flare and counterpoint of words, and I want the nonverbal, what can never be spoken, as a foundation. I'd like my daily bread, however you arrange it, and I'd also like to be bread or sustenance for some others, even after I've left. A song they can walk a trail with. I don't think we talked about money or success or fame, whatever that is, for a long time. I hoped you'd forget that part. Now I'll do as you say about all that, whatever seems most useful. I'd like to keep learning how to brew bitter herbs and how to make them translucent, edible, almost crystalline. What I offered you wasn't much. You can always wake me, like my closest friend or my most loved lover. You can burn my favorite snapshot of myself, lead me on paths or non-paths anywhere. You cannot make sense for years and I'll still believe you. Drop husbands, tribes, and jobs as you wish. You mostly aren't jealous, have taken your place alongside my gardens, bread-making, children, printing presses. But when your eyes shoot sparks and you say, choose between me and it has always gone, except when it was my kids. I took that risk and we worked it out somehow. Now I've come to a place where there are no kids, no tribe, no bread, no garden. Only you and your two faces, formed and formless. Nothing to hold back now, and nothing to offer. I stand before you a piece of wind with a notebook and pen. Which one of us is it dances, and which is the quasar? So that's going to be in this book called The Poetry Deal, which will be, I'm trying to gather up poems I wrote in the 80s and the 90s, and I have all these notebooks and all this untyped stuff, and I'm putting it in yes and maybe and no files, and and that process is going on, but it's been interesting. I want to move from there to reading a little bit of poetry that is related to our world as it is right now politically. I've picked a couple, and we'll see. One of them is called Bulletin, and it wasn't really written this war around. It was written in 1991 when we were doing the Gulf War. It seems like we've always been doing the Gulf War. And it's called Bulletin. It's a prose poem. It is happening even as you read this page. By the time you finish reading this, it will be over. She will have left the hotel and disappeared. He will have eaten the pills. That one will slip and crack her skull on the floor. That one will go out in a drive-by shooting. Halfway around the world, the bombs are dropping. As you read these words, it is already too late. 200,000 children will have starved. One of them held the jewel in his brain. Another could cure plagues with her breath. As you read this line, 1,000 have died of AIDS. They die alone, hidden in furnished rooms. They die on the ground all over Africa. Halfway around the world, the bombs are falling. Do not think to correct this by refusing to read. It happens as you put down the paper, head for the door. The ozone reaches the point of no return, the butterfly's belly flop, the last firefly, etc. Do not think to correct this by reading. The bombs burst the small skull of an Arab infant. The silky black hair is stuck to your hands with brains, with bits of blood. There is less shrieking than you would expect. A soft silence. The silence of the poor, those who could not afford to leave. drop flowers on them from your mind, why don't you? I guess we'll have to stay and take our chances. They die so silently, even as we speak. Black eyes of children seek eyes of the dying mother. Bricks fall, dirt spurts like fountains in the streets. In the time you fill a cup, they die of thirst. In the time it takes to turn off the radio. Not past, not future. The huts are blazing now. South of Market, a woman ODs with an elegant sigh. No more, no less than is needed. Halfway around the world, the bombs are dropping. And thinking about that stuff, I would like to read this other poem. This poem bulletin and this one I'm going to read now are going to be in the new edition of Revolutionary Letters, a book I also started long, long ago, around 67, and City Lights brought out the first Revolutionary Letters in a book in 71, I think. It's kept it in print for 20 years, and it's coming back in print. The thing about Revolutionary Letters was each time the new poems that I'd written that were relating to the world of situation were added. So there'll be about 25 new ones in this one. And Bulletin is one, and Good Clean Fun, which I'm about to read. We've heard so much talk about terrorism, and we don't look at the terrorism of our own politicos. So, it's terrorism, isn't it, when you're afraid to answer the door for lack of a green card, afraid to look for work, walk into the hospital when your child is sick? And what else than terrorism could you call those smallpox blankets we gave the Indians? The Trail of Tears, the raids on ghost-dancing tribes? It's terrorism when you're forbidden to speak your language, paddled for it, made to run 100 laps in the snow in your thin and holy sneakers. What do you call it when you're locked in your high school classroom, armed policemen manning the halls? Isn't it terrorism to force a young woman to talk to her parents about her clandestine love, the child she will or will not carry? Is it terrorism to shoot striking union workers, 1934, pick off AIM members one by one? What happened to the Hampton family in Chicago, Fred Hampton blown away in his bed? Would you call that terrorism? Or the Move kids in Philadelphia bombed in their home? Or all the stories we don't know, buried in throats stuffed with socks or pierced with bullets? Would you call it terrorism, what happened at Wounded Knee? Or the drug wars picking off the youth of our cities, as they already picked off 20 years ago, or terrified into silence, the ones who should be leading us now? You know the names. What was COINTELPRO if not terrorism? What new initials are they calling it today? Is Leonard Peltier a victim of terrorism? Is Mumia Abu Jamal? Is it terrorism if you are terrified of the INS, the IRS, the landlord, your boss, the man who might do your job for less? If you're scared of your health insurance, no health insurance, scared of your street, your hallway, scared every month you might not get to the first and the next measly check? Is it terrorism to take food from hungry school kids? To threaten teenagers who still have hope enough, have joy enough to bring babies into this mess? How has terrorism touched you, shaped your life? Are you afraid to go out, to walk in your city, your suburb, your countryside, to read, to speak your own language, wear your tribe's clothes? Afraid of the thin-shelled birds with twisted necks, poisoned by nitrates, by selenium? Afraid that the dawn will be silent, the forests gray? Is the assault on native intelligence and goodwill that we call the evening news anything other than an act of terror? What was the Gulf War but terrorism, wearing the death mask of order? One big car bomb it was, the guys who drove the car dying now, one by one, ignored. Is acid rain a form of terrorism? Think for yourself. Is GATT or NAFTA anything but a pact among brigands? The World Bank, the IMF, their backup men? How long before they fight over the spoils? Who'll do the fighting for them? Is Alan Greenspan perhaps the biggest known and named of our terrorist leaders? Here, nurtured here, trained here, the dark design of whose hearts makes Hutu and Tutsi, Croat and Muslim and Serb, merely diversionary tactics before the onslaught. It's funny to read that now. I wrote it in 1991. I mean, not funny, haha. It's just strange how much it's even more so than it was, but... Okay. So, having read those, I'd like to sort of end with a poem that's going to go into Loba when it comes out again. I'm going to read part of this poem. It's 13 pages long, and I wrote it over a series of sleepless nights and days when the controversy was going on at the Brooklyn Museum about the painting of Mary, or the Mother of God, or whatever you want to say, that had included some elephant dung in it. And somehow it seemed to me that if you can't propose either a feminine principle or a masculine principle that isn't willing to be inclusive of everything. That's ridiculous. It's impossible. What are we talking about when we talk about deity at all? So this thing got written over many, many days, and my friend Kathy Acker had died soon before that. I didn't know her well, but we were friends, and or allies or something. And so I dedicated it to her, and it's called Litany for Kathy Acker. Begins with a quote from William Carlos Williams. The female principle of the world is my appeal in the extremity to which I have come. Our Lady of the Elephants, Our Lady of the Armadillos, Our Lady of the Water Moccasins, Our Great White Lady of Sharks, Our Lady of Mandrake, Our Lady of the Bayou, Our Lady of Subways, Our Lady of Blind Cats, Our Lady of Albino Alligators, Our Lady of Desperados, our 300-pound lady who sits on stoops in a house dress in the summer night, Our Lady of Tenements, Our Lady of Roaches, Our Lady of Rats and Water Beetles, Our Lady of Murder, Our Lady of Incest, Our Lady of Hemlock and Wolfbane, Our Lady of Weeds, Our Lady of Dandelions in empty lots in the Bronx, Our Lady of Mallows, Our Lady of Poison Oak, Our Lady of the West Nile virus, Our Lady of bubonic plague, our retro Lady of all lethal viruses, Our Lady of Ebola, Our Lady who's the cry of the marshland, Our Lady of the Everglades, Our Lady of Crocodiles, Our Lady of Mojo and Killer Chants, Our Lady of Down Syndrome, Our Lady of Breast Cancer, Our Lady who weeps in hospital waiting rooms, Our Lady of Hurricanes, Our Lady of Storms and their shadows, Dust Devil Lady, Our Lady of Tornadoes, Our Lady of Piss and Sweat, Our Lady of HIV Come, Our Lady the African vulture who waits for dead children, Our Lady of Suicide, Our Lady of flash floods, monsoons and dead rivers, Our Lady of Schizophrenics, Our Lady of Bipolar Disorder, Our Lady of Prozac, Our Lady of Pepper Spray, Our Lady of Migraine, Our Lady of Famine, Our Lady of Guano, Our Lady of Poisoned Wheat, Our Lady of Scientist Killers, Our Lady of DNA, Our Lady of Cyberspace, Our Lady of Graffiti, Our Lady of Drive-By Shootings, Our Lady of the Ghetto, Our Lady of the Barrio, Our Lady of all banditos, Our Lady of the Stock Market, Our Lady of the Dust Bowl, Our Lady of Freeways, Our Lady of Smog, Our Lady of Killer Children, Our Lady of Cold Blood, Our Lady of Outer Space, it's dark and it's cold, Our Lady Corpse Eater, Our Lady of Bombs and Explosives, Our Lady who hurls airplanes from the sky, Our Lady of Dead Monarch Butterflies in fields of bioengineered corn.
Okay, we're set. We're ready. Ladies and gentlemen, what can I say? Please welcome one of the greatest poets in the whole wide world, Diane di Prima.
Hi, everybody. Hi. Look at the time. Okay. I don't want to hog too much time, but I wrote this in the hotel. Sandy provided me a hotel room for overnight. Thank you. And I wrote this in the hotel just before I left. Did you guys happen to see the paper today? You'll know what I'm talking about here. Later, after the newspaper about the bombing of the wedding party, there's someone in our government said, you can bet there wouldn't be 200 people just in the middle of the desert celebrating a wedding. Who celebrates anything in the middle of the desert? Clearly, they know a lot about the culture they're dealing with. Anyway, spring, new life, a wedding. Let's bomb it. Nobody has a wedding in the middle of the desert, right? Wrong. But you bombed it. 40 people dead. They were up to no good, you tell us. They were up to spring, new life, a wedding in the desert. A little bit of a poem, but sometimes you got to deal with it immediately or it drives you crazy. A couple of people asked me to do a couple of things. I'm going to do them first. Someone requested a poem written in '76 at Naropa Institute in Boulder, where I was teaching. It's called No Problem Party Poem. And what happened was we were going to be leaving in a day or two, and everybody in that wild group in those days announced that we were having a party in my apartment, much to my surprise. Okay, so this is how it went. No problem party poem. First glass broken on patio, no problem. Forgotten sour cream for vegetables, no problem. Louis McAdams' tough lower jaw, no problem. Cops arriving to watch belly dancer, no problem. Plastic bags of melted ice all over the place, no problem. Wine on linen tablecloths, no problem. I can't see in this light. Scratchy stereo, no problem. Neighbor's dogs, no problem. Interviewer from Berkeley Barb, no problem. Absence of more beer, no problem. Too little dope, no problem. Leering Naropans, no problem. Cigarette butts on the altars, no problem. Marilyn vomiting into planter box, no problem. Phoebe renouncing love, no problem. Louis renouncing Phoebe, no problem. Hungry ghosts, no problem. Absence of children, no problem. Heat, no problem. Dark, no problem. Arnica scattered in nylon rug, no problem. Ashes in bowl of bleached bones and juniper berries, no problem. Lost satie tape, no problem. Arrogance, no problem. Loss of temper, no problem. Boxes of beer cans and wine bottles all over the place, no problem. Thousands and thousands of styrofoam cups, no problem. Gregory Corso, no problem. Allen Ginsberg, no problem. Diane di Prima, no problem. Anne Waldman's varicose veins, no problem. Dick Gallup's birthday, forgotten, no problem. Joanne Kiger's peyote and rum, no problem. Wine, no problem. Coca-Cola, no problem. Getting it on in the wet grass, no problem. Running out of toilet paper, no problem. Decimation of pennyroyal, no problem. Destruction of shell hair clasp, no problem. Paranoia, no problem. Claustrophobia, no problem. Growing up in Brooklyn streets, no problem. Growing up in Tibet, no problem. Growing up in Chicano, Texas, no problem. Belly dancing, certainly no problem. Figuring it all out, no problem. Giving it all up, no problem. Giving it all away, no problem. Devouring everything in sight, no problem. What else in Alan's refrigerator? What else in Anne's cupboard? What do you know that you haven't told us yet? No problem. No problem. No problem. Staying another day? No problem. Getting out of town? No problem. Telling the truth? Almost no problem. Easy to stay awake. Easy to go to sleep. Easy to sing the blues. Easy to chant sutras. What's all the fuss about? It decomposes. No problem. We pack it in boxes. No problem. We swallow it with water, lock it in the trunk, make a quick getaway. No problem. Well, that was then. This was somewhere in between. I thought I'd read the poem that Frank printed. When it happened, I was quite surprised. Sometimes I get poems and they're like radio broadcasts. They just happen in my head and I write them down. I had been reading one of the books that I read on the Templars, and this, as you can see at the beginning of your program, there's an explanation, but this is a nephew of Jacques de Molay, who was going to be burned the next day. And apparently he was being sent by his uncle to get all the texts and other sacred objects out of France. The tradition has it that they were brought to the north of Scotland and became the foundation of what was the early Freemason groups. But that's just one of many legends we don't know. But anyway, Jacques de Molay is talking here and talking to me about, or talking to you about going there and picking the stuff up, like his uncle told him to. Came to the crypt and passed the pillars, black and white, at the entrance. Low lintel, opening on high, hollow room. Flexed ceiling, angled and vaulted like Hiram's dream. Here pause. The books aside, the treasure, inescapable shapes and formings of metal, candelabra, 7-branched and 12. The moon-shaped casket, silver, and the golden cube took these and 5 ancient scrolls, link-chained to the casements of interior windows. I had the key. The window opened on walls only. Only this one night, but there was time enough. Nothing in this room would be forgotten. 5 scrolls and an ancient book. The shroud, for show or comfort. Would it comfort him, my uncle, to this white and silver lame, heavier cloth than I had ever touched, would wrap his charred bones when the next moon rose? Would it comfort him the scrolls were leaving France? The silver casket and the golden cube would wash in light thrown by waves on northern shores. Salt, cold. Would he return? The secrets came with me, but he had the secret, knew the door of entry, could find the pillars, black and white, and the low lintel, would find them anywhere. It's interesting, I came tonight thinking I would mostly read new political poems, new revolutionary letters, and I brought to show the cover of the New Revolutionary Letters book that'll be out in September, and it's the same image that Frank chose for the cover of the program. So I was 19 in that picture. So, I don't know, things are the way they are, I guess, and they seem to be conducive of there's certain kinds of reading. This is all the new poems that are being added to Revolutionary Letters. I may get back to them, but we go here first. These are new pieces of Loba, plus also other things in the back. Other things in the back, where are they? Okay, this one is in the new Revolutionary Letters, that green folder on the floor, but I'm going to read it from this copy. It's simply called Wind, and it's a prose poem written in the was it last year or the year before that Brackage died? Last year. Right after Stan Brackage, the great experimental filmmaker, and Kirby Doyle, a great but very little known prose writer, fiction writer from the Digger time, the 60s. Both died within that period, and also the war was doing its thing. So this is just a prose poem called Wind. Wind tears at the city like the nervous fingers of an invalid unraveling an Afghan, like the choppy waves of a small New Jersey lake, leaving oil scum along the shore. Wind picks up plastic bags, rolls syringes around in the gutter, ruffles feathers of hungry pigeons chomping on street sheet. Bring our war home, it says. And a skinny, homeless girl waves her small fist at the heavens. Now you read it here, said the guy when I gave him my $1. We gotta, he says. We gotta bring the war home like it says. Oh, I'll read it all right. I tell him it's not me you gotta convince. I continue under my breath. Wind turns a corner, rips the camellias off a kind of hedge behind which an American flag hangs discreetly. Azaleas come apart, ranunculus and Iceland poppies hold their own. Windows rattle, pipes bang, a tea kettle screeches, just so we know inside is no safer than out. A breeze moves circumspectly through the loft, and the ficus prepares to drop its leaves. Don't read the paper, listen to the news. The names I'm trying to remember were never written, not even in cuneiform, never written, not spoken, so as you could pronounce them. Consonants so different the ear cannot distinguish. Anguish or laughter is that. Flute, tabor, what kind of drum? No point in learning that alphabet now. It's dust. The wind rules particulate matter from pyres, from burning oil wells, crushed clay tablets older than the names we know. It would be a mistake to confuse these gods with Ceres, with Demeter, even Isis. They go, Argon with their own, riding lions, carrying emblems we can't decipher, charms smiling at good mouth. That was Kirby Doyle, cremated a mere 36 hours ago. Missing in action, more poets than you imagine, more street urchins, teen hustlers with sores that haven't healed since the first Gulf War. Only the mothers are not missing. Mostly they can't afford that luxury. Stay, why don't you, and rip your chador into bandages. Stay and distill pure water from sweat or tears. Quick eyes gone under earth's lid. That would be Brackage, now 10 days gone. Stop, we need look no further than the most brutal wars are fought on this, our own dead soil. The wind carries its dust to our nostrils, parts for too gross of broken statues, a few thousand battered books. The quotes in that are from a poem by Pound called Bruce Sullivan and Loba. I was on the road on the anniversary of the bombing, beginning of the bombing. Last year I was here for the beginning of the bombing, reading into it, a peace reading. This is a short poem from that time, March 22nd, 2004. Is it a video game or World War III? I go to bed, bewildered by the news. This is sometimes I find poems because I never get my stuff typed. have all these untyped notebooks everywhere, and I was looking for something, and I found this poem which describes the death of Philip Whalen, and I've almost never read it, so I thought I'd bring it tonight. It's from a series on the topics of various people's death, called Deaths. Philip Whalen, June 26, 2002. But I wrote it actually about a year later. So, large man, great light down, Laguna Honda, large fort beneath hill. I came to, riding through fog, riding at solstice while the great waters of the Pacific move as mist across the land. Large man, great light, mind as a beacon across the city, across the nation. He lay, breathing harsh, deep, breathing even, no struggle. The men gathered around a table in the antechamber, poets and monks. They spoke in soft voices. The women gathered around the bed in the small death chamber. They breathed. He breathed. Skin dry, hot. One woman, poet, moistened his dry lips. The great man, motionless, his breath like slow, even steps. As you come to end of a path, emerge from trees, look over the cliff's edge. This is for a friend of mine, Garrett Lansing, who's both a poet and a magician, as I have tried to be in my life. And, you know, sometimes Tathagata, the name of the Buddha, is translated as the thus come. So this is thinking about that. For Garrett Lansing, I vanish as the witness always vanishes after the fact. The Buddha is the thus come, but the mark of the magus is to go. Same word. And recently, yes, that same weekend, March 23rd, the next day after the short poem, I think I was in Detroit, and yes, I was in Detroit. This poem is, I was still thinking about what was going on a year ago and so on. This poem is a cut-up. I often do cut-ups on the road. You can get great poems out of the instructions for getting to the exit in case of a fire, plus USA Today. It makes a good combination. But this time, this was from an article on Ornette Coleman, that was in the Detroit Metro Times that week, plus the New York Times first page for March 23rd, plus an essay from the Essays and Introductions by W.B. Yeats. It was what I was reading at the moment, was an essay on Dante Gabriel Rossetti that was called The Happiest of Poets. So I cut those three up. I don't think there's much of me in this, just mostly all cut up. It's called Believing Almost Nothing. The evolution of jazz is largely a story of titans, the killing starkly illuminated. As he sat under an elm tree and watched the starlings bear the coffin of Sheikh Ahmed Yassin. I didn't try to prove to anyone whether I was right, he said. He needs to disengage unilaterally, whether there or in the south of England, and pull incredible music from those around him. Beauty had moved the ancient sculptors and poets on rooftops and in crumbled domains of security. Rather than settle down and repeat past triumphs, the whispers had it, the attack was an assassination. I think more good has come of it than not. Some of the women wear traditional headscarves. He has no memory of escaping the prisons and ages. To heaven, you martyr, Mr. Arafat says. Perfect things are final things, he announced. I always say there is no bad music. A 3-day mourning period and a Muslim prayer for the dead. He seems to be saying, the artist can sing the truth. The artist can sing the truth. A prayer for the dead, a 3-day mourning. He talks about musical themes, that the important things, the things we must believe in, are final. He's got very distinct ideas. Protests and violence flared in Gaza again. I just keep writing and trying to get a band. He was of the kin of the well and the green tree, with multiple rhythm sections, double quartets. I think more good has come of it than not. The early Christians were kin of the wilderness. The person that was leading the way is gone, but now there is tremendous motivation. The deadly helicopter strike, whose shadow made him cower on the grass, the desire to solo as if he has no memory, we must believe in or perish. In this matter, he was like a child, pushed home in his wheelchair after dawn prayers, flying in the same cage or universe as all the others, the black, red, yellow, or green flags of different factions. Toward the end, he knew clearly what he was doing. His death seemed to hold consequences for every player. He just pulled the music right out of me. It was stunning, like missiles in a Gaza lane at dawn. I never read that before. I had no idea how that came about.
Thanks.
See, there's other stuff here. I think I really want to go to more revolutionary letters, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Reach them. Okay. What I really want to do is read this poem that I wrote November 2001, a couple of months after the Two Towers, but before all the rest of the shenanigans had started. Well, we were bombing Afghanistan, and so, but I wrote this while I had been teaching Muriel Rukeyser in my theory and practice of poetics class, and I said, okay, everybody, we're going to write a political poem. And they went, oh, grown, that's not cool, we don't want to do that. But everybody wrote pretty interesting political poems, and by the time I got them started, I wrote this down, and it took me 20 minutes, so it must have been really on my mind. And I'll stop with it because it's kind of long. So last piece, it's called Notes Toward a Poem of Revolution, and it has a quote from Gertrude Stein at its beginning. Some of you heard this last year, a peace thing. I hope you don't mind. The quote is from Gertrude Stein, and it says, "It is better to lose and win than win and be defeated." And it's really as a series of poems. I'll just pause between them, I'm not going to do numbers and all that. What did we, in all honesty, expect? That fascist architecture flaunting at the sky, converted now to fluid, toxic smoke, ash. The long finger of impermanence touches us all, and nobody can hog the marbles and expect the others to play. While we mourn and rant for years over our 3,000, how many starve thanks to our greed, our unappeasable hunger? Water is rising, wind is blowing, gonna strip the last of our cheap and awkward cities, only the music, some of the music remains. The voice of my daughter quivering on the phone as she watches the towers burn from her new apartment, the one with the view. Gulf War 91, my son at the demonstration stops by to eat. Well, we took out a recruiting station, he tells me, while the cops followed the crowd downtown. A group of us split off. I nod and bite my tongue. Why talk about what happened the year he was born? Wanted a Northwest Passage, and you've got it, Magellan, Henry Hudson, Amerigo, da Gama. Are you proud, all of you? It took us only 500 years to melt that polar ice. And is it suicide when penguins give up, lie down? Children sold in Africa, in India, child labor laws held barely 80 years, now 8-year-olds in brothels, dead eyes. Who invented this hell? Black holes in our hearts, ground zero our minds, hands that won't open. Let go. Tell me again, how many janitors died in the towers? How many sandwich makers, toilet cleaners, families will get that 200 per victim in aid? Lost Montsegur, we did. Lost Prague, the German peasant uprisings, lost Andalusia twice, the Paris Commune, lost at Haymarket, lost Paul Robeson, Spain, even lost Dashiell Hammett, lost San Francisco fairly recently. Chuck in his shorts, watering his garden, gunned down in the Mill Valley dawn. We hole up, enclaves who speak again in whispers, as they did when I first came to these cities. Don't mourn, don't organize, strike and move on.
Sure, a Loba would be great.
All right. Thank you, Diane. It was a pleasure to listen to you.
Okay, a short Loba piece.
An encore.
That's what Frank asked.
You need whispers.
Okay, I'm going to read two short Loba pieces. One of the hymns to Kali, were translated by they were translated into French and into funny English, and then I just remade versions of them. They were written in Bengali by a saint in the 19th century, Hindu saint called Ramprasad. I want to read just one of those, and then I want to read one thing. This is Loba Book 3, yes, it's going these days, or part of it is. So, I can't ever remember what part of Loba is. The colony, here they are. I'm just reading the first of these, is I think 20, some of them. Because you love the burning grounds, I have made a burning ground of my heart, O Colleen, that you, beloved, may dance there unceasingly. Nothing burns in my heart but funeral fire. Nothing dwells there now but the ashes of the dead. O mother, who dances on Lord Shiva's corpse, come swaying to the sound of drums. Enter my heart's ash. I await you with closed eyes. And one tiny little recent one called Nothing Impossible. That's going to be in book 3. Nothing impossible for girls. Nothing a teen can't do. Share food, clothes, take it all out onto the street.
Diane di Prima, make some noise.